Silas McAllister ripped the frozen canvas off the wagon and found 5 children piled on top of each other like cordwood. The smallest one wasn't moving. He grabbed her, pressed his ear to her chest, and heard a heartbeat so weak it might as well have been a goodbye. "Breathe," he said through his teeth. "Breathe, damn you." The oldest girl pointed a knife at his throat. "Touch her again and I'll gut you." Silas didn't back away. He didn't have time. The child in his arms was dying. The blizzard was closing in, and somewhere behind them, the man who'd left these children to freeze was already coming back. If this story reaches your heart, comment the city you're watching from and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Now let me tell you how a broken cowboy and 5 forgotten children saved each other's lives. The horse stopped first. Silas pulled the reins, but Buck planted his hooves in the snow and wouldn't budge. Ears pinned flat, nostrils blowing hard. "What is it, boy?" Buck stamped and tossed his head toward the tree line. Silas drew his Colt and scanned the white wall of falling snow. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound except the wind cutting through the pines like a woman screaming. Then he saw it. A wagon. No horses hitched to it, no fire, no lantern. Just a dead wagon sitting crooked on the trail, with snow burying it an inch at a time. Silas almost rode past. He'd learned years ago that stopping for other people's trouble was the fastest way to find your own. He had $4 left from the 12 he'd started with, a sack of flour and salt pork on Buck's back, and a 2-hour ride home through the worst blizzard Wyoming had seen in a decade. That was enough trouble for one man. But Buck wouldn't move. All right. Silas dismounted and walked toward the wagon with his gun up and his finger on the trigger. He grabbed the frozen canvas and ripped it back. 5 faces stared up at him. 5 children, packed together under a single blanket that was more holes than cloth. The oldest was a girl, with a butcher knife in her fist, held steady at his throat. Behind her, a boy pressed himself against 3 smaller children, his arms spread wide like a human shield. "Get away from us!" The girl's voice was raw, broken. But the knife didn't shake. Silas holstered his Colt, raised both hands where she could see them. "I ain't here to hurt you." "That's what he said, too." "Who?" "The man who took our horses and left us here to die." Something cold dropped through Silas's gut. "How long you been out here?" "Since yesterday." 24 hours in an open wagon during a Wyoming blizzard. He looked past the girl to the children behind her. A boy, maybe 10, jaw locked so tight the bones in his face stood out. A smaller girl, clutching a rag doll with both hands, rocking herself. Another boy, darker skin, black hair, watching Silas with eyes that didn't belong on a child. And in the oldest girl's lap, the smallest one. 4 years old, maybe less. Eyes half open, lips blue, chest barely moving. "She's dying," Silas said. The girl's knife hand jerked. "She ain't dying. She's just cold." "That ain't cold. That's fever. How long she been like this?" "She was shaking this morning. Then she stopped shaking and got real quiet." The girl's voice cracked. She shoved it back together. "She just needs to get warm." Silas reached for the child. The knife came up fast. "I said don't touch her." "Listen to me." Silas didn't raise his voice, didn't move, just held the girl's eyes with his and spoke the way he'd talk to a spooked horse. Slow, steady, no sudden moves. "Your sister's burning up from the inside. I've seen this before. She needs a fire, warm water, and compresses on her chest. Or she's got maybe 4 hours. You can stab me if you want, but she'll still be dead by dark." The girl's face broke. Not all at once, just a crack, right down the center of all that fierce. And underneath it was a 12-year-old who'd been carrying the world too long. "You got a place?" she whispered. "Cabin, 2 hours north. Fire and walls." "You live alone?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because everyone I loved is dead." The girl stared at him. Whatever she saw in his face must have answered a question she didn't ask, because she lowered the knife. Not all the way, but enough. "I'm Hannah. Hannah Ruth Dawson." She nodded behind her. "That's my brother Sam. My sister Clara. My sister Nettie." Her eyes moved to the dark-haired boy. "And Joe. He ain't blood, but he's with us." "Silas McAllister. We can do the rest of the introductions when your sister's not dying. Can you move?" "We can all move except Nettie." "Then move. Now." Hannah wrapped Nettie in the blanket and held her out. Silas took the child and felt the heat radiating through the cloth, like a brick pulled from a fire. She weighed nothing. Bones and fever and a heartbeat that fluttered against his chest like a trapped bird. He tucked her inside his coat against his body. Her small head fell against his shoulder, and her fingers, weak as moth wings, curled into his shirt and held on. Something cracked open in Silas's chest. A door he'd nailed shut 6 years ago, when he'd stood over 2 graves and swore he'd never hold anything small and precious again. "Don't you die on me," he told the child. "You hear me? Don't you dare." He turned to the others. "Sam, can you ride?" The boy's jaw was still clenched, but he nodded. When he spoke, the words stumbled out broken. "Yes, sir. I can ride." "Good. You get on the horse. Clara goes in front of you, Joe behind. Hannah walks with me." Sam moved first. He lifted Clara down from the wagon, and the little girl clung to her rag doll with one hand and her brother's coat with the other. "Rosie's scared," Clara whispered. Tell Rosie I got her," Sam said. He swung onto Buck's back and pulled Clara up in front of him. His arms went around her, sure and tight. The stutter lived in his mouth, but his hands knew what they were doing. This boy had been holding things together with those hands for a long time. Joe climbed up behind Sam without a word. He moved like smoke, quiet and quick, and he settled onto the horse's back like he'd been born to it. His right hand rested on the bone-handled knife at his belt. Cheyenne steel. His mother's blade. "You ride before?" Silas asked. "My mother's people don't walk when they can ride." "Good. Keep those two steady. Trail's going to be rough." Joe's chin lifted. One nod. No wasted words. That left Hannah. She stood in the snow, her boots already soaked through, the butcher knife tucked in her belt. She looked at the wagon, at everything she was leaving behind. Then she looked at Silas. "If this is a trick, I want you to know I'll find a way to make you pay. Even if I'm small, even if it takes years. It ain't a trick. Then let's go before my sister runs out of time." They moved into the storm. Silas broke trail, his boots punching through snow that came up past his knees. Hannah walked in his footprints to save strength. Smart. The kind of smart you only got from learning the hard way that wasted energy could kill you. Nettie burned against his chest. Every few steps, Silas checked her breathing. Still there. Shallow and wet, but there. "Tell me about the man who left you," Silas said. Hannah didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was flat. The way people talked when the feelings were too big to let out, so they locked them in a box and spoke around them. "His name's Victor Crane. He found us after Mama died. Said the law gave him rights over orphan children. Had papers, seals, everything official." "What happened to your folks?" "Pa got shot by road agents outside Cheyenne. $14 and a pair of boots. That's what my father's life was worth. She paused. Mama kept us going 3 more weeks. Then the fever took her. She died holding Nettie's hand, and Nettie hasn't spoken a word since. Silas looked down at the silent child against his chest. Not born mute. Grief mute. A 4-year-old who'd watched her mother die and decided the world didn't deserve her voice anymore. Crane showed up 2 days after Mama passed, Hannah continued. All smiles, all promises. Said he ran a home for children. Said we'd be safe. But Joe heard him talking to another man the first night, talking about how much children fetch at the mining camps, how the small ones fit in narrow shafts, how the crippled ones and the quiet ones cost less because nobody fights for them. Silas's hand tightened on Buck's reins until the leather bit into his palm. He had a book, Hannah said. Black leather, like his coat. He wrote our names in it. Next to each name he wrote a number. I saw mine. $40. Clara's was 30. Sam's was 20, because of the stutter. Joe's was 15, because he's half Indian. Her voice went quiet. Nettie's was 5. $5. $5 for my sister's life. That's what he figured she was worth. A girl who can't talk and can't work. $5 or leave her on the side of the road and save the feed. Silas stopped walking. The snow fell around them, thick and silent, and for a moment the only sound was the wind and Nettie's rattling breath. He ain't getting any of you, Silas said. Hannah looked up at him. You don't even know us. I know enough. You know what? That we're 5 mouths you can't feed? That Crane's got papers and the law on his side? That taking us in makes you a target? I know your sister's worth more than $5. I know your brother holds his family together at 10 years old. I know that boy up there carries his mother's knife because it's the only piece of home he's got left. And I know you've been fighting since the day your daddy died, and you ain't stopped once. Hannah's eyes filled. She blinked hard, twice, 3 times. Then she turned and kept walking. They didn't speak again for a long time. The storm pressed down on them, the temperature dropping as the light faded. Clara's voice drifted back from the horse. I'm cold. Rosie's cold too. Almost there, sweetheart. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. Sam's voice came next, steadier now. Silas, Joe says the storm's got 2 more days in it. Silas looked back at Joe. How do you know? Wind shifted northwest. Snow's getting finer. My mother could read a storm the way your people read a clock. Joe paused. She was right every time. Then we better move faster. The cabin came out of the snow like a ghost. Dark walls against white ground, smoke still crawling from the chimney where the morning fire hadn't died. Silas had never been so glad to see that miserable pile of logs in his life. That's it? Clara asked. That's it. It's really small. It's really warm. He carried Nettie through the door first, laid her on the bed close to the fireplace, threw wood on the coals, and blew until flames caught and climbed. Hannah was already behind him. Water? Bucket by the door. Cloth? Chest in the corner. Cotton shirts. Rip what you need. Hannah moved like she'd done this 100 times. Found the shirts, tore them into strips, filled the pot, and hung it over the fire. Her hands never shook. Her face never changed. She'd locked everything away behind that iron wall of hers and gone to work. She peeled back Nettie's wet clothes and pressed a warm compress to the child's chest. Nettie's eyes fluttered. Her hand shot out and grabbed Hannah's wrist. Didn't squeeze, just held. Even burning with fever, even lost somewhere between this world and the next, she reached for her sister.
"I'm here," Hannah whispered. "I'm right here, Nettie. I ain't going nowhere."
Sam brought Clara inside. The little girl's teeth were chattering so hard she couldn't talk, so she held up her doll and made it wave at the room. Sam checked the door, then the window, then the corners. He mapped every exit, every shadow, every possible threat, the way a soldier would clear a building. 10 years old and already wired for danger.
"Secure,"
he said quietly, then caught himself. Looked embarrassed. "Good man," Silas said. "Barn's outside. Horse needs grain. Second stall, left side." Sam straightened.
"Yes, sir."
He went out without hesitation. Joe came in last. He closed the door, put his back against it, drew his knife, and sat down. His eyes swept the room once, then settled on Silas, watching, measuring. "You going to sit there all night?" Silas asked. "Somebody should watch the door." "You're 9 years old."
"My mother killed a wolf at 9. Age doesn't matter. Readiness does."
Silas looked at this boy who belonged to two worlds and was welcome in neither. Cheyenne blood and white blood, mixed together in a body that both sides rejected. He'd been thrown away by everyone who should have claimed him, and he was still standing, still fighting, still keeping watch at doors. "Your mother sounds like a woman worth knowing." Joe's hand tightened on his knife. "She was the strongest person who ever lived." "I believe it." Something shifted in Joe's face. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest crack in the armor. The first sign that maybe, possibly, this stranger might be different from every other white man who'd looked at Joe and seen something less than human. Silas put beans and salt pork on the fire. It wasn't enough food for 6 people. Wasn't even close. But it was hot, and right now hot was the difference between living and dying. Clara sat on the floor near the hearth, holding her doll close. "Rosie wants to know if we're staying."
"What does Clara want to know?"
The girl peeked over the doll's head.
"Same thing."
"You're staying tonight. That's all I can promise."
"Sam says promises are just words people use before they leave."
The words hit Silas like a mule kick. He crouched down to Clara's level. "Sam's been let down by the wrong people. So have you. I can't fix that. But I can tell you this. Tonight you're going to eat. Tonight you're going to be warm. And tonight nobody's coming through that door who means you harm."
"What about tomorrow?"
"Tomorrow I'll tell you the same thing." Clara thought about this. Then she held up her doll.
"Rosie says okay."
Rosie's a smart girl. They ate. Silas gave himself the smallest portion, and nobody argued, because Hannah saw it and understood, and the others followed her lead. Sam came back from the barn, smelling like hay and horse, and sat close to his sisters. He ate with one hand. The other stayed on Clara's shoulder.
"But Buck pushed his nose against my chest," Sam said. "Just stood there breathing on me. Nobody's ever been that gentle."
"He's a good horse."
"Better than most people."
"Most days, yeah." After dinner, Hannah changed Nettie's compresses. The fever held. Didn't climb, didn't break. The child's fingers still gripped Hannah's wrist, that tiny anchor between life and letting go. "She needs a doctor," Hannah said quietly.
"Nearest doctor's in Elk Creek. 10 miles. Can't ride it in this storm."
"So we wait?"
"We wait. We keep the compresses going. We keep her warm."
Silas sat down in his chair and looked at Hannah. "You've done this before." Mama got sick 3 times on the trail. I nursed her through 2 of them. Hannah's voice stayed flat. 3rd time, nothing I did was enough. That's not your fault. I know that. But the way she said it made clear she didn't believe it. Not down where it mattered. The cabin settled into quiet. Fire cracking, wind outside, Nettie's wet breathing. Joe sat against the door with his knife across his knees, eyes open, watching. Sam lay on the floor with Clara curled against his side. The little girl had her doll pressed to her ear. Rosie says she hears the wind talking. What's it saying? She says it's saying we're going to be okay. Then it must be true. Clara closed her eyes. In minutes, she was asleep. Sam stayed awake a little longer, his hands still on her shoulder, his eyes moving between the door and the window. Then he, too, slipped under. Hannah sat on the floor beside Nettie's bed. She hadn't stopped working since they'd arrived, hadn't sat still, hadn't let the wall come down, hadn't let herself be 12. She looked at Silas, and in the firelight he saw the exhaustion she'd been hiding. You can sleep, he said. Can't. Why? Because if I close my eyes, I'll wake up and this'll be another lie. Another man who said safe and meant something else. I mean safe. Prove it. How? Hannah reached down and picked up her knife from where she'd set it on the floor. She held it out to him, handle first. Take it. If you're what you say you are, you don't need me armed to feel comfortable. And if you're not what you say you are, I just gave you the only advantage I had. Silas looked at the knife, then at Hannah. He reached out and pushed the blade back toward her. Keep it. A girl your age should always have a knife, especially around men she don't know yet. Hannah's chin trembled. Just once. She caught it and held it still. But that single tremor said more than tears ever could. She tucked the knife back in her belt. My mama would have liked you, she said. I'd have liked her too. Anyone who raised you had to be something special. Hannah turned back to Nettie, and for the first time since he'd found them, Silas saw her shoulders drop. Just a fraction. Just enough to let him know that some small piece of the weight she carried had shifted. Not gone, not yet, but shared. Silas didn't sleep. He sat in his chair with his Colt across his knees and watched the fire burn down and built it back up and watched it burn down again. Around 2 in the morning, Nettie's breathing changed. It got easier, smoother. The wet rattle faded. Her grip on Hannah's wrist loosened as her body relaxed into something closer to real sleep. Fever's easing, Hannah said, and her voice shook for the first time all night. She's tough. She's all I've got. That ain't true anymore. Hannah didn't respond, but she didn't argue either. At 3 in the morning, Clara woke screaming. No words, just a raw, terrified sound that ripped through the cabin and sent Joe to his feet with his knife up and Sam bolt upright with his fists raised. Clara sat on the floor, eyes wide, seeing something that wasn't there. The man, she gasped. The man in the black coat. He's coming. He's coming to take us back. Silas crossed to her and knelt down. Nobody's here, Clara, just us. He's coming. He always comes. He wrote our names in his book, and he said he'd find us anywhere. Let him come. Silas's voice was low and steady. Let him walk right up to that door. He'll find out what happens when a man tries to take something from me. Clara's wild eyes focused on his face. You'd fight him? Sweetheart, I'd walk through hellfire for any one of you, and I've been to hell before. The devil knows my name. Clara crawled into his lap. She pressed her face against his chest and wrapped her arms around his neck. And Silas held her, the way he used to hold Lily on nights when thunder shook their cabin and the world felt too big and too mean for a little girl to face alone.
Tell Rosie, Clara whispered into his shirt. We're going to be okay, Rosie. I promise.
Sam watched from the floor. His jaw was tight, his fists still clenched, but his eyes were wet. He wiped them fast, hoping nobody saw. Joe saw, and Joe looked away, giving the boy his dignity. Clara fell asleep in his arms. Silas carried her back to Sam and laid her down gentle. Sam pulled her close, without a word. His hand found hers in the dark and held on. Joe settled back against the door. His eyes met Silas's across the firelight. "You meant that," Joe said. "What you told her." "Every word. My mother used to say you can tell a man's heart by what he does when he thinks nobody's watching. She said the ones who are gentle with children and animals are the ones worth trusting." Joe paused. "She also said trust takes time." "Your mother was right." "She usually was." Joe leaned his head back against the door. His knife hand relaxed, just slightly, and his eyes closed for the first time since they'd arrived. Silas sat in the dark, 5 children breathing under his roof. The smallest one's fever breaking, the oldest one's wall cracking. A boy who stuttered, but never let go. A girl who talked to her doll because the world was too scary to face without a friend. And a boy who carried his dead mother's knife and his living mother's wisdom and refused to let either one go. 5 children he couldn't afford, 5 mouths he couldn't feed, 5 lives that would make him a target for every corrupt lawman and child trader in the territory. Catherine would have taken them in without a second thought. She'd have had them fed and warm and laughing within an hour. She'd have known exactly what to do, what to say, how to make 5 broken children feel whole again. Catherine had always been the strong one. Silas had just been the man lucky enough to stand beside her. He looked at the 2 graves he could see through the window. Snow covered them now, white mounds in the darkness. 6 years he'd been dying in this cabin. 6 years of breathing without living, eating without tasting, waking up every morning and wondering why he bothered. Now he knew why. Not because he deserved a second chance. He didn't believe in that. But because 5 children were freezing on a trail, and someone had to stop. Someone had to be the man who didn't ride past. And God, or fate, or dumb luck, had put Silas McAllister on that trail at that moment, and his horse had refused to move. And here he was. Here they all were. The fire burned low. The storm raged on. And somewhere out there, a man named Victor Crane sat in a warm saloon, checking names in a black leather book, calculating what 5 missing children were worth to the men who paid him. Crane would come looking. Silas was certain of that. Men who dealt in children didn't write off their investments. He'd come with papers and badges and every weapon the law could give a man who knew how to bend it. Let him come. Silas checked his Colt. 6 rounds in the cylinder. A box of 20 more in the saddlebag. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. And for the first time in 6 years, he had something worth defending. He pulled his chair closer to the fire and settled in for the long, dark hours before dawn. Tomorrow the storm would still be raging. Tomorrow, he'd have to figure out how to feed 6 people on $4. Tomorrow, the whole territory would learn that a broken-down rancher had taken in 5 orphans, and every kind of trouble that fact could bring would start heading his way. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, these children were warm. Tonight, they were breathing. Tonight, a 4-year-old girl's fever was breaking, and a 12-year-old girl had set her knife down, and a boy who never cried had let his tears fall, and another boy had closed his eyes, trusting a stranger to guard the door. And tonight, in a cabin that had been a tomb for 6 years, Silas McAllister heard something he thought he'd never hear again. Children breathing in their sleep. It sounded like the whole world starting over. The storm held for 2 days, just like Joe said it would. Silas rationed the beans and salt pork down to mouthfuls, splitting everything 6 ways and lying about having eaten when Hannah caught him skipping meals. "You didn't touch your plate," Hannah said on the second morning. "Ate before you woke up." "No, you didn't. The pot's the same level it was last night." "You checking my supplies now?" "Somebody has to. You'll starve yourself feeding us, and then what? Dead man's no good to anyone." Silas looked at this girl, who was too sharp for her own good and too old for her age. "Eat your breakfast, Hannah." "Eat yours first." They stared at each other across the small cabin. Sam watched from the corner, chewing slowly, trying to make himself invisible the way children did when adults got tense. Clara held up her doll. "Rosie says you should both eat." Silas took a spoonful of beans. Hannah took one too. Neither of them looked away. "Stubborn man," Hannah muttered.
"Stubborn girl. I learned it from my mama."
"She taught you well." Nettie's fever broke on the second night. She opened her eyes and looked around the cabin like she'd never seen walls before. Hannah was beside her in a heartbeat, touching her forehead, checking her breathing, counting her pulse the way their mother must have taught her.
"She's cool. Silas, she's cool."
Silas crossed to the bed and laid his hand on Nettie's forehead. The fire was gone. In its place was clammy, damp skin and a weak pulse, but steady. The child looked up at him with gray eyes that held nothing. No fear, no relief. Just empty space where a 4-year-old's world should have been. "Hey, Nettie," he said softly. "Welcome back." Nettie stared at him. Her lips didn't move. Her expression didn't change. But her hand crept out from under the blanket and found his finger, and she held on. Hannah made a sound. A small, choked noise that she swallowed before it could become a sob.
"She hasn't reached for anyone since Mama died. Not even me."
"She's reaching now."
"Why you? She doesn't even know you."
Silas didn't have an answer for that. He just sat there, while a silent child held his finger and stared at him with eyes that had seen too much, and decided to stop looking. After a while, Nettie's grip loosened, and she slipped back into sleep. Real sleep this time. The kind that healed instead of burned. On the third morning, the storm broke. Joe called it an hour before dawn. Wind shifting, sun by noon. By mid-morning, the sky cracked open, blue and cold. Snow lay 3 feet deep across the valley, glittering so bright it hurt to look at. Silas stood in the doorway, doing math he didn't like. $4, 6 mouths, a child who needed a doctor, 5 children who needed everything he didn't have. "I have to ride into Elk Creek," he told Hannah. "Town's 10 miles south. I need supplies, and Nettie needs Doc Harlan to look at her." Hannah's face went tight.
"You're leaving?"
"I'm going to town. There's a difference."
"Is there?"
"I'll be back before dark."
"That's what Pa said when he went to sell the horses in Cheyenne. He never came back either."
"Your pa got killed by road agents. I'm riding to a general store." "And if Crane's there?" The name hung between them. Silas had been thinking about Crane for 2 days, turning the man over in his mind like a stone he couldn't put down. A man with a black leather book who wrote children's names next to dollar amounts. A man who'd left 5 kids in a blizzard and called them damaged goods. If Crane's there, that's his problem, not mine. "Take Joe with you," Hannah said. Joe looked up from where he sat cleaning his knife.
"I'll go."
"You're 9, Silas said, "and I've traveled more miles than most men in this territory. I know how to watch a road. I know how to spot trouble before it spots you." Joe sheathed his knife. My mother said 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, and she never rode anywhere alone. Silas studied the boy. Under the hard exterior and the careful words, Joe was asking for something. Not permission, something deeper. He was asking to be trusted, to be seen as capable, to be treated as something other than the half-breed throwaway the world had decided he was. "Saddle up," Silas said. Joe moved before the words finished leaving Silas's mouth. Hannah pulled Silas aside while the others weren't listening. "If something happens to you out there, what do we do?" "Nothing's going to happen." "Answer the question." Silas reached into the chest and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "My neighbor's name is Thomas Kincaid. Old Tom. Ranch is 3 miles northeast. Follow the creek. This paper's got his name on it. You get to him, he'll help." "You trust him?" "With my life." "That's your life. I'm asking about ours." "With your lives too." Hannah took the paper. She didn't look at it, just tucked it inside her dress, close to her skin. "Be back before dark." "I will." "Promise me." "I promise." "I'm choosing to believe you. Don't make me regret it." Silas and Joe rode out under a sky so blue it looked painted. The snow crunched under Buck's hooves, and Joe sat behind Silas with his knife on his belt and his eyes moving constantly, scanning the tree line, the ridges, the trail behind them. "You always this watchful?" Silas asked. "You stay alive longer when you pay attention." "Fair point." They rode in silence for a while. The mountains rose around them, white and massive, and the trail carved through drifts that Buck shouldered through with the patience of a horse who'd seen worse. "Silas." "Yeah?" "In town, when people see me, they're going to have opinions." "People always have opinions." "About my blood. My mother's people. Most towns I've been through, they look at me like I'm something that needs scraping off their boots." Silas turned in the saddle to look at the boy. "What do you want me to do about it?" "Nothing. I can handle it. Just don't pretend it's not happening. My mother said the worst kind of white man isn't the one who hates you to your face. It's the one who watches it happen and acts like he doesn't see it." "Your mother was a wise woman." "She was the wisest person I ever knew." "Then here's what I'll tell you. Anyone in that town looks at you wrong, they answer to me. Not because you can't handle yourself. Because you shouldn't have to. Not while you're with me." Joe was quiet for a long time. Then he said very softly, "My father was white. He told my mother he loved her. Then he left before I was born and never came back. Every white man I've met since then has been some version of him, saying one thing, doing another." "I ain't your father." "No, you're not." Joe paused. "You're something I haven't figured out yet." "Take your time." Elk Creek appeared around a bend in the trail, a cluster of buildings huddled in a valley like they were trying to stay warm. Main Street, such as it was, general store, saloon, church with a steeple that leaned slightly east, sheriff's office, livery stable. Maybe 40 buildings total, most of them looking like they'd give up and collapse if the wind blew hard enough. Silas tied Buck outside the general store and pushed through the door. The warmth inside hit him like a wall. A potbelly stove glowed red in the center of the room, and shelves lined every surface, packed with cans and cloth and tools and everything a frontier town needed to pretend it was civilized. Behind the counter stood a woman, 58, maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back tight and eyes that missed nothing. Margaret Holloway. Maggie. She'd run this store since her husband died 8 years ago, and she ran it better than he ever had. "Silas McAllister. Haven't seen you since October." Been busy. Busy dying of loneliness from what I hear. Maggie's eyes shifted to Joe, standing just inside the door. She looked at the boy the way she looked at everything, straight on, no flinching. "And who's this?" "Joe. He's with me." "I can see that. You hungry, Joe?" Joe blinked. Whatever he'd expected walking into a white woman's store, it wasn't that. "Yes, ma'am." Maggie pulled a biscuit from a tin behind the counter and held it out. "Fresh this morning. Don't tell me you're too proud to eat. Pride's a luxury, and biscuits are a necessity." Joe took the biscuit. "Thank you, ma'am." "Polite, too. Better manners than half the grown men in this town." She turned back to Silas. "What do you need?" "Everything." Silas pulled his $4 from his coat. "This is what I've got." "That'll buy you about a week's worth if we stretch it." "I need it to last a month, and I need enough for 6. Maggie's eyebrows went up. "6? Since when are there 6 of you?" Silas told her. "Not all of it. Just enough. 5 children abandoned in a wagon. A man named Crane who dealt in kids. A 4-year-old with a fever that had just broken." Maggie listened without interrupting. When he finished, she came around the counter and started pulling items from shelves. Flour, beans, coffee, salt, a slab of bacon, canned peaches, a bag of sugar, 2 blankets, a bolt of cloth for making clothes. "Maggie, that's more than $4 worth." "I know what it's worth. I can't pay for all that." "Did I ask you to?" She kept stacking items on the counter. "My husband and I never had children. Always wanted them. God had other plans. If 5 children need feeding, I'll feed them. You can pay me back when you can. And if you can't, then it's a gift, and you'll accept it like a man who knows when to say thank you." Silas opened his mouth, closed it. "Thank you, Maggie." "That's better. Now, this man Crane, does Sheriff Cross know about him?" "Haven't talked to Cross yet." Maggie's expression shifted. Something careful moved behind her eyes. "Be cautious with Reuben Cross. He's not a bad man, but he's not a brave one either. And men who aren't brave tend to lean toward whoever's paying." "You think he's bought?" "I think he's expensive to maintain, and I think there are people in this territory who can afford it." She finished stacking supplies and looked at him. "You're going to need more than $4 and a good heart to keep those children, Silas. You're going to need the law on your side. Or at least, not against you." "You know a lawyer?" "I know a reverend, Elijah Pope. Lost his arm at Shiloh and found God in the hospital tent. He's hard, and he's fair, and he doesn't scare easy. Talk to him." "I will." Silas loaded the supplies onto Buck while Joe stood watch. The boy hadn't relaxed since they'd entered town. His eyes tracked every face, every movement, cataloging threats the way his mother's people had been doing for generations. They were crossing the street when a voice stopped them. "McAllister." Silas turned. Sheriff Reuben Cross stood on the porch of his office. A big man with a belly that spoke of easy living and a badge that spoke of authority he might not have earned. He was 50, red-faced, and holding a cup of coffee like he'd been waiting. "Sheriff, heard you rode in with a boy." Cross looked at Joe, looked away, looked back. "Indian?" "Half," Joe said before Silas could answer. His chin was up, his hand was on his knife. "Didn't ask you, boy." "He's with me," Silas said. "I can see that. Question is why. And while we're asking questions, I hear you picked up some strays during the storm. 5 children, no parents. That true?" Word traveled fast in small towns, faster than Silas liked. "Found 5 kids in a wagon, abandoned. Brought them to my place." That's a lot of mouths for a man who can barely feed himself. My business. It's my business when children are involved. Territorial law says orphans go to authorized guardians or institutions, not to single men living alone on failing ranches. Territorial law also says you can't sell children to mining operations, but I hear that happens plenty in this territory. Cross's face went red, then pale. He set his coffee down carefully. That's a hell of an accusation. It's a hell of a world. Cross stepped closer, lowered his voice. Listen to me, McAllister. I don't know what you think you know, but there are people in this territory with long arms and short tempers. People who don't take kindly to ranchers playing hero. You'd be smart to hand those kids over to proper authorities and go back to your cattle. Who are the proper authorities? You? A judge I haven't met? A man named Victor Crane who writes children's names in a book next to price tags? Cross flinched. It was small, fast, and he covered it well. But Silas saw it, and Joe saw it, and they both filed it away. I don't know any Victor Crane, Cross said. That's funny, because Victor Crane seems to know how things work around here real well. Cross's hand dropped to his belt. Not his gun, just his belt. But the gesture said enough. This conversation is over. Keep those kids if you want, but when the paperwork catches up, don't say I didn't warn you. Silas tipped his hat. Appreciate the concern, Sheriff. He walked Buck down the street with Joe beside him. The boy waited until they were clear of town before he spoke. He's lying. I know. He knows Crane. When you said the name, his left eye twitched and he shifted his weight to his back foot. My mother taught me to read people the way I read weather. What else did you read? He's scared, not of you, of whoever Crane works for. Someone bigger. Someone who makes a small-town sheriff nervous. Judge, maybe. Somebody with real power. What do we do? We go home. We feed those kids, and we figure out our next move before they figure out theirs. The ride back took 2 hours. The sun was already dropping behind the mountains when the cabin came into view. Smoke from the chimney. Buck picked up his pace. Hannah opened the door before Silas could reach it. Her eyes counted 2 riders, found them both alive, and some of the tension left her shoulders. You're back. Told you I would be. Supplies? More than we paid for. Woman at the store wouldn't take no for an answer. Hannah helped unload while Clara bounced around the cabin, examining each item like it was Christmas morning. Peaches! Rosie, look! Peaches in a can! She hugged the tin against her chest. Can we have them tonight? After dinner, Silas said. Rosie says after dinner is too far away. Rosie can wait. Sam stood by the fire, watching the supplies pile up. His jaw worked, the stutter building behind his teeth. That's a lot of food. Enough for a while. You didn't steal it? No. People don't give things away for free, not to strangers. Maggie Holloway does. Sam processed this, filed it somewhere alongside all the other data points he was collecting about a world that had hurt him and might be trying to make up for it. Okay, he said finally. Just that. Okay. One small step toward believing that kindness didn't always come with a price. That night, they ate better than they had since arriving. Bacon and beans and cornbread, with canned peaches for dessert. Clara ate her peaches one slice at a time, holding each one up for Rosie to inspect before putting it in her mouth. Sam ate steadily, methodically, the way he did everything. Joe ate fast and clean, wasting nothing. Hannah ate last, after everyone else had finished, checking the pot to make sure there was enough before she served herself. Mother's habit. The one who eats last, to make sure everyone else has enough. Sit down and eat, Hannah, Silas said. There's plenty. I'm eating. You're managing. There's a difference. Sit down. Be a kid for 5 minutes. Hannah looked at him like he'd said something in a foreign language. Be a kid. She probably didn't remember how. 12 years old with a mother's hands and a soldier's eyes and a weight on her shoulders that would have broken most adults. She sat. She ate. And for 5 minutes, the wall came down and she was just a hungry girl eating peaches by a fire. After dinner, Silas told them about Sheriff Cross. He didn't sugarcoat it. These children had been lied to enough. They deserved the truth, even when the truth was ugly. The sheriff knows Crane, Silas said, or knows someone connected to Crane. Either way, he's not on our side. So what do we do? Hannah asked. Tomorrow, I ride back to town, talk to Reverend Pope at the church, see if he can help us get legal standing. Legal standing to do what? To keep you. The cabin went quiet. 5 children looked at him. Sam's mouth opened, then closed. Clara hugged Rosie tighter. Joe's hand stilled on his knife. Nettie, awake now and propped against pillows on the bed, stared at Silas with those empty gray eyes. Hannah spoke first. You mean that? For real? I don't say things I don't mean. For how long? Silas met her eyes. For as long as you'll have me. That's forever talk. Maybe it is. You barely know us. We could be terrible. Sam leaves his boots where you trip on them. Clara talks to her doll at 3 a.m. Joe sleeps with a knife. And Nettie... Hannah looked at her little sister. Nettie might never talk again. I leave my boots where I trip on them too. I've been talking to a horse for 6 years because there was nobody else. And I spent every night with a gun in my lap. Silas looked at Nettie. And if she never talks again, that's fine. She doesn't have to talk. She just has to be here. Nettie's hand moved. Slow and deliberate, she pointed at Silas. Then she pressed her hand flat against her own chest, over her heart. Hannah's breath caught. She hasn't done that since Mama. That means... She stopped, swallowed hard. Mama used to put her hand on her heart when she said, I love you. Nettie started doing it back. It was their thing. Silas looked at the 4-year-old girl who wouldn't speak, but had just said the loudest thing anyone had said all night. His throat closed. His eyes burned. He pressed his own hand against his chest and held it there. Nettie's face didn't change, but her eyes did. Something flickered in that empty gray space. Something small and stubborn and alive, like a candle lit in a room that had been dark for a very long time. Clara broke the silence. Rosie wants to know if this means we're a family now. Silas cleared his throat. What does Clara want to know? Same thing. Always the same thing. Then tell Rosie we're working on it. Sam stood up, walked to Silas, stood there for a moment, fists clenched at his sides, his whole body vibrating with something he couldn't get past the stutter in his throat. Then he gave up on words entirely and wrapped his arms around Silas's waist and held on. Silas put his hand on the boy's head. Sam's shoulders shook once, twice, then went still. "Oh, okay," Sam said into Silas's shirt. "Okay." Joe didn't move from his spot by the door. He watched it all with those sharp, careful eyes. When Silas looked at him, Joe gave the smallest nod. Not acceptance. Not yet. But acknowledgement that maybe this man was something different. Something worth watching a little longer before deciding. Outside, the night was clear and cold and full of stars. Somewhere south, in Elk Creek, Sheriff Reuben Cross was writing a letter to a man he claimed not to know.
And somewhere farther south, in a warm room with a black leather book open on the table, Victor Crane was drawing a line through 5 names and writing beside them a single word: found. Reverend Elijah Pope had one arm, a Bible worn soft from handling, and eyes that looked at Silas like they could see straight through to the bones beneath. 5 children, Pope said. 5. And you want to keep them? I do. You can barely keep yourself, McAllister. I've watched you come into town once a month looking thinner each time. You drink too much. You talk too little. And now you want to raise 5 orphans in a cabin that's one hard winter from falling down? Silas sat in the church pew and took it. Pope wasn't wrong about any of it. The Reverend stood at the altar, his empty left sleeve pinned to his coat, his remaining hand resting on the back of a chair. He'd lost the arm at Shiloh and found something harder than bone to replace it. Conviction. I'm not asking for your approval, Silas said. I'm asking for your help. With what, exactly? Legal standing. Papers that say those children are in my care. Something that holds up if a man named Victor Crane comes to take them. Pope's expression changed. Subtle, but Silas caught it. The Reverend's jaw tightened, and his good hand pressed flat against the chair. You said Crane? You know the name. I know the name. Pope came down from the altar and sat on the pew across from Silas. His voice dropped. Victor Crane has been through this territory 3 times in the past 2 years. Each time, children go missing. Families on the wagon trails, mostly. Poor families. Desperate ones. He shows up with papers and promises and legal language that sounds right, even when it's rotten underneath. Where do the children go? I've been trying to find out. Nobody talks. The families who sold their kids are too ashamed. The ones who had their kids taken are too scared. And the law. Pope shook his head. The law in this territory runs through Judge Cornelius Stark. And Stark runs things the way a spider runs a web. You don't see the threads until you're already caught. Judge Stark. Territorial judge, based in Casper, but his reach goes further than that. Cross answers to him. Half the sheriffs in Wyoming answer to him. And from what I've been able to piece together, Crane answers to him too. Silas leaned forward. So the man selling children has a judge protecting him. I can't prove it, not yet, but I've written to the federal marshal's office in Denver twice. No response. Pope's eye held steady on Silas. You understand what you're walking into. This isn't one bad man with a book. This is a system. Papers, badges, courtrooms, all of it working together to make the stealing of children look legal. I understand. Do you? Because if you fight this, they won't just come for the children. They'll come for you. They'll call you a kidnapper, a squatter, an unfit guardian. They'll use every tool they have, and they have plenty. Let them. Pope studied him for a long moment. You were cavalry, weren't you? 12 years. It shows. You've got that look. The one men get when they've decided to charge, and nothing short of a bullet will stop them. Pope reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded document. I started drawing these up 6 months ago. Guardianship papers. I drafted them for a family in Sheridan whose children were being threatened, but the family moved before we could file. He laid the paper on the pew between them. The legal language is sound. I had a lawyer in Denver review it. If we fill in your name and the children's names, and I sign as witness, it gives you temporary legal custody, pending a formal hearing. Will it hold against Crane's papers? Depends on the judge. If Stark hears the case, you'll lose before you open your mouth. But if we can get it in front of a federal court, different story. How do we get it to federal court? We find evidence that Crane is trafficking children across territorial lines. That makes it federal, out of Stark's hands. Evidence like what? Testimony, records, other families willing to come forward. Pope folded his hand in his lap. I've been fighting this quietly for 2 years, Silas. Writing letters, asking questions, getting nowhere because I'm one man with one arm and a church full of people too scared to stand up. But you've got something I don't. What's that? 5 children who can testify to exactly what Crane does. 5 witnesses with names and faces and a story that would make any federal judge pay attention. Silas thought about Hannah telling him about the black leather book, about the numbers written next to names, about Crane calling her siblings damaged goods. Hannah's 12. Sam stutters. Nettie doesn't speak at all. Joe's half Cheyenne, which means half the territory won't take his word for anything. And Clara's 7. You think anyone's going to listen to them? I think 5 children's voices are harder to ignore than one reverend's letters. They've been through enough. They have, and they'll go through worse if Crane takes them. Pope's voice softened. I'm not asking them to be soldiers, Silas. I'm asking them to tell the truth. That's all. Silas picked up the guardianship papers, read them through twice. His hands were steady, but something was shaking inside him, deep down where the old fears lived. The fear of failing, of not being enough, of standing over more graves and knowing he could have done something different. Where do I sign? Right there. And I'll need the children's full names. Hannah Ruth Dawson, Samuel Dawson, Clara Mae Dawson, Annette Dawson, and Josiah Whitfield. Pope wrote each name carefully with his one hand, the pen moving slow but sure. When he finished, he signed his own name and pressed the church seal into wax at the bottom. This makes you their legal guardian in the eyes of God, and, with any luck, the law. Guard it with your life. Silas folded the paper and put it inside his coat, against his chest, next to his heart. Thank you, Reverend. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning of the fight. Silas was loading Buck outside the church when a hand caught his arm. He spun, reaching for his Colt, and found himself face to face with old Tom Kincaid. Easy, son. Just me. Tom was 67 years old, with a face like cracked leather and hands that could still break a horse or a man's jaw, depending on what the day required. He'd been Silas's neighbor since the beginning. The man who dug Catherine and Lily's graves. The man who checked on Silas every few weeks, whether Silas wanted checking on or not. Heard you picked up some passengers, Tom said. News travels. Everything travels in small towns. Gossip fastest of all. Tom leaned against the hitching post. 5 kids, Silas? You sure about this? No. Honest answer. That's good. A man who's sure about something this big is either lying or stupid. Tom crossed his arms. What do you need? I didn't ask for help. I didn't wait to be asked. What do you need? Silas looked at this old man, who'd been more of a father to him than his own blood ever was. I need someone to help me fix the cabin. Needs another room, maybe 2. Can't keep 5 kids in a space built for one man. I can swing a hammer. I need someone to teach the boys how to work cattle. I'm going to be stretched thin. I can do that too. And I need someone who'll stand with me if things go sideways with the law. Tom's eyes went hard, not angry, certain. Son, I stood at Gettysburg when the whole Confederate army came screaming up that hill. I've stood in worse places than a Wyoming courtroom. You tell me when and where, and I'll be there. You don't owe me anything, Tom. This ain't about owing. This is about what's right. And what's right is that 5 children don't get sold to mine operators because some judge decided they were less than human. Tom straightened. Now introduce me to these kids before the day gets away from us. They rode back together, Tom on his old mare, Silas on Buck, Joe riding behind Silas, as quiet as he'd been all morning. When they reached the cabin, Hannah had the door open before they dismounted. Her hand was on her knife. It was always on her knife. "Who's he?" Hannah asked, nodding at Tom. "Thomas Kincaid, my neighbor. He's here to help." Tom dismounted and walked to the door. He stopped 3 feet away and took off his hat. "Miss Dawson, name's Tom. I'm old, I'm loud, and I make the best venison stew in Wyoming territory. Your guardian here asked me to come by, and I brought a haunch of deer that needs cooking."
Hannah looked at the venison, then at Tom, then at Silas. "You told him about us?" He already knew. Small town. "Does everyone know?" "Probably." Hannah's face went tight. "That means Crane knows too." "That's why Tom's here." Tom stepped inside and immediately went to work like he'd lived there his whole life. He found the cooking pot, started breaking down the venison, and had water boiling before Hannah could offer to help. Clara watched him from behind her doll. "Rosie wants to know if you're a grandfather." Tom looked at the little girl. "I'm whatever you need me to be, little miss." "Rosie needs a grandfather." "Then Rosie's got one." Clara smiled. It was the biggest smile Silas had seen from her since the night she'd crawled into his lap. She walked over to Tom and held up her doll. "This is Rosie. She's shy." "Well, you tell Rosie I'm shy too. We can be shy together." "You don't look shy." "Best kind of shy. The kind you can't see." Clara giggled. The sound rang through the cabin like something stolen from another world. A world where children laughed instead of cried. Where old men made jokes instead of dug graves. Where a family could be built from nothing but stubbornness and need. Sam came in from the barn, where he'd been feeding Buck. He saw Tom and stopped. His jaw locked. The stutter built behind his teeth like water behind a dam. "Sam," Silas said, "this is Tom Kincaid. He's going to be around." Sam's eyes went to Tom's hands, checking for weapons, for fists, for all the things a boy checked when a strange man entered his space. You a friend of Silas?" "Closest thing he's got to one. And you must be the young man who's been keeping his sisters safe." Sam straightened. That's my job." "Hard job for a boy your age." "I'm not a boy." "No, I can see that. You're a man who happens to be 10. That's different, and it's rarer than you know." Tom held out his hand. "Pleased to meet you, Sam." Sam looked at the hand, then at Tom's face. Then he reached out and shook it. His grip was firm, his eyes stayed dry, but something in his shoulders eased, just slightly. The weight shifting again. Not gone, but shared. They ate venison stew that night, the best meal the cabin had seen since Silas built it. Tom told stories about the old days, about hunting buffalo before the herds disappeared, about the war, about building a life in country that didn't want you. He talked the way old men did, easy and winding, and the children listened because his voice was warm and his stories had the ring of truth. Even Joe listened. He didn't participate, didn't move from his spot by the door, but his eyes followed Tom's words, and once, when Tom mentioned trading with the Cheyenne, Joe's hand touched his mother's knife. Not in defense, in memory. Tom noticed. He didn't call attention to it, just shifted his story to include more about the Cheyenne, about their horsemanship, their courage, the way they read the land like a book written in grass and stone and sky. "Finest people I ever traded with," Tom said. "A Cheyenne's word was gold, better than gold. Gold you can steal. A man's word, you can't take that from him. Joe's voice came from the doorway, quiet but clear.
My mother said the same thing.
Your mother was right, and I'd wager she was right about most things.
She was.
Tom looked at Joe for a long time. Then he nodded once, the way one man acknowledged another, and went back to his stew. After dinner, Tom left with a promise to return in the morning with tools for the cabin expansion. Silas walked him to his horse. Good kids, Tom said, mounting up. All of them. They've been through hell. I can see it, especially the older girl. She's carrying a man's weight on a child's back. You need to find a way to let her put it down. I'm trying. Try harder, because if you don't, she'll break. And she'll break quiet, the way strong people do.
You won't know it's happened until it's too late.
Tom rode off into the dark. Silas stood watching until the sound of hooves faded, then went back inside. Hannah was washing plates. The other children were asleep, even Joe, who'd finally surrendered to exhaustion with his knife still in his hand.
He's good,
Hannah said without looking up.
Tom, he's real.
He is.
The Reverend, is he real too?
As real as they come.
And the woman at the store, Maggie?
Real. Hannah set the last plate down and dried her hands. She turned to face Silas, and in the firelight, he could see the cracks in her armor widening. Not breaking, widening. Like a wall with too much pressure behind it.
All my life, the real people have been the ones who leave. The fake ones are the ones who stay until they get what they want. I don't know how to tell the difference anymore.
You're 12. You shouldn't have to tell the difference.
But I do.
Because I have 4 people depending on me to get it right. Silas sat down. Hannah, listen to me. You don't have 4 people depending on you anymore. You have 4 people and me. That's different.
How?
Because I'm the adult. The worrying, the planning, the staying up at night, figuring out what comes next. That's my job now, not yours.
You can't just say that and make it true.
No, I have to prove it, and I will. But you have to let me. Hannah stared at the fire. Her jaw worked. Her hands gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles went white.
If I let go, she whispered, and you drop us, I won't be able to pick up the pieces again. I barely picked them up last time.
I won't drop you.
Everyone drops us.
I'm not everyone. And I've got papers now that say those kids are mine to protect. Legal papers, signed by a reverend and sealed by a church. Nobody takes them without a fight. Hannah looked at him. Show me. Silas pulled the guardianship document from his coat and handed it to her. Hannah read it slowly, her lips moving over the legal language. When she got to the names, her fingers stopped.
You listed all of us.
All 5.
You listed Joe.
Joe's part of this family.
He's not blood.
Neither am I. Blood doesn't make a family, Hannah. Choice does. Hannah folded the paper and handed it back. When she looked up, her eyes were bright, not with tears, with something fiercer.
If they come for us, she said, I fight too. Don't try to protect me from it. Don't hide me in the barn. I have a right to fight for my family.
Agreed.
And I keep the knife.
Wouldn't dream of taking it. Hannah nodded. Then she did something she hadn't done since the night Silas found them. She sat down. Not on the floor beside Nettie, not at the table where she could watch the door. She sat in the chair by the fire and pulled her knees to her chest and let her head rest against the back, like a 12-year-old, like a child. I'm tired, Silas. I know. I've been tired since Mama died. I know that too. Is it okay if I'm tired for a little while? Just a little while? It's okay. I've got the watch tonight. Hannah closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. Her hands unclenched. The knife stayed in her belt, but her fingers weren't on it for the first time since Missouri. Silas sat by the door where Joe usually kept guard. He checked his Colt. 6 rounds, 20 more in the box. Tom would be back in the morning. Pope had the papers filed. Maggie had supplies coming. It wasn't enough. He knew that. Crane was out there. Stark was behind him. Cross was compromised. The whole machinery of territorial law could be turned against one man and 5 children, with a single signature from the right judge. But Silas had something they didn't. He had people willing to stand. A reverend who'd lost his arm and found his spine. A storekeeper who fed strangers because it was right. An old man who'd faced down the Confederate Army and wasn't afraid of judges. And he had 5 children who'd survived a blizzard, a betrayal, and a fever, and were still here, still breathing, still fighting. Let Crane come. Let him bring his book and his papers and his bought sheriff and his corrupt judge. Let him ride up to this cabin with every weapon the law gave him. He'd find a locked door, a loaded gun, and a man who had nothing left to lose except everything he'd just found. The fire burned low, the children slept, and outside, the snow started falling again, soft and steady, covering tracks and trails and all the evidence of who had been where and when. But some tracks couldn't be covered. Some trails, once started, had to be followed to the end. And this trail, Silas knew, was heading straight for a reckoning. Crane came on a Tuesday. Silas was in the barn teaching Sam how to brush buck when Joe appeared in the doorway. The boy didn't speak, just pointed south. Silas set down the brush and walked to the barn door. 3 riders coming up the trail. The one in front wore a black leather coat. Sam, go inside. Tell Hannah to bar the door and keep everyone away from the windows. What's happening? Go, now. Sam ran. Silas pulled his Colt, checked the cylinder, and holstered it. 6 rounds. He touched his coat where the guardianship papers sat against his chest. Then he stepped out into the cold and waited. Victor Crane pulled his horse to a stop 20 feet from the cabin. He was exactly what Hannah had described. Tall, clean, a gray beard trimmed neat, a scar on his chin like someone had tried to cut his lying mouth off and missed. The gold watch chain hung from his vest. Behind him rode 2 men with rifles across their saddles, and faces that said they'd use them. Crane smiled, the kind of smile that made your skin want to crawl off your bones and hide. Mr. McAllister, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Can't say the same. Understandable. You've been hearing stories about me. From the children, I presume. Children do have such vivid imaginations. Get off my land. Crane didn't move. His horse stamped in the snow, breath coming out in clouds. I'm here on official business. I have a court order signed by Judge Cornelius Stark, granting me legal guardianship of 5 minor children currently in your unlawful possession. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it up. Shall I read it? I can read fine, and I've got papers of my own. Ah, yes, Reverend Pope's little document. Crane's smile widened. I'm afraid a church guardianship doesn't supersede a territorial court order, Mr. McAllister. The law is quite clear on this. The law is also clear on buying and selling children. I don't buy and sell children. I provide placement services for orphans in need. It's charity work. Difficult, thankless, but someone has to do it. Someone has to put a bullet in you too. Question is, who gets the honor? Crane's smile flickered. Just a moment. Then it came back, wider than before. Threats won't help your case. In fact, they'll hurt it significantly when I report this interaction to Judge Stark. He reached into his coat again and produced a second document. This is a warrant for your arrest. Kidnapping, harboring stolen property, obstruction of lawful custody. Those children aren't property. The law disagrees. Then the law is wrong. The law is never wrong, Mr. McAllister. It's simply inconvenient for people who don't understand it. Crane tucked the papers away. Now, I'm going to give you one opportunity. Hand over the children willingly, and I'll ask Judge Stark to drop the criminal charges. You go back to your cattle and your whiskey and your quiet little life. No harm done. And the children? Will be placed in appropriate facilities where they'll receive food, shelter, and gainful employment. Mines. You mean mines. I mean employment suited to their abilities. A 4-year-old who doesn't talk. What employment suits her abilities? Crane's jaw tightened, the first crack in his polish. That's not your concern. I'm making it my concern. Behind Silas, the cabin door opened. He heard it and felt his stomach drop. He'd told Hannah to stay inside, to bar the door, to keep everyone away from the windows. Hannah walked out and stood beside him. The knife was in her belt. Her face was white, but her eyes were on fire. Hannah, get back inside. No. That's not a request. And I'm not asking permission. Hannah looked at Crane. Hello, Mr. Crane. Crane's expression shifted. Something hungry moved behind his eyes. Hannah, you look well. Better than when I last saw you. Last time you saw me, you were leaving me and my family to freeze to death. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. You took our horses. You took our food. You told my brother he was worth $20, and my baby sister was worth $5. Then you rode away and left us in a blizzard. You're confused, child. The trauma of your parents' deaths has affected your memory. My memory's perfect, and so is my brother's, and Joe's, 3 witnesses who remember every word you said. Crane's smile died. He looked at his 2 men, then back at Hannah. This is exactly why children shouldn't be allowed to make decisions. They lack the capacity to understand complex situations. I understand plenty. I understand you buy kids from desperate families and sell them to mines. I understand you've got a judge in your pocket and a sheriff on your payroll. And I understand that if you take us, we disappear and nobody asks questions. Hannah. Silas's voice was quiet. That's enough. It's not nearly enough. Hannah took a step forward. You want to take me? Fine. Come take me yourself. Don't send hired guns. Don't hide behind papers. You walk up here and put your hands on me and see what happens. Crane stared at her. 12 years old, 90 pounds, standing in the snow with a kitchen knife and the fury of someone who'd lost everything and refused to lose anything more. You've made your point, Crane said. His voice had changed. The charm was gone. What remained was cold and flat and ugly. I'll be back with the sheriff and a full warrant. When I return, anyone who resists will be arrested, and the children will be removed by force if necessary. He pulled his horse around. You've got 24 hours, McAllister. Use them wisely. The 3 riders disappeared down the trail. Silas watched until they were gone, then turned to Hannah. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the effort of not putting a bullet in Crane's back. I told you to stay inside, and I told you I fight for my family. That wasn't fighting. That was painting a target on yourself. He already had a target on me. At least now he knows I'll bite back. Silas opened his mouth to argue. But the door opened again. Sam stood there, his face tight, his hands balled into fists.
I heard everything. What do we do?
We don't panic.
I'm not panicking. I'm asking what we do.
Behind Sam, Clara's face appeared. She was holding Rosie against her chest.
The bad man's coming back, isn't he?
Yes, Silas said, because lying to them was worse than the truth. But he's not taking you.
How do you know?
Because I won't let him.
What if you can't stop him?
The question hung in the frozen air. Clara's eyes were steady, too steady for a 7-year-old. She'd been let down enough times to know that wanting to stop something and being able to stop it were two different things. Silas knelt in the snow so he was level with her.
You know what your brother said about promises?
That they're just words people use before they leave? Clara nodded.
He's right. Words are easy. So I'm not going to make you a promise. I'm going to make you a fact. And the fact is this. Every person in this cabin, and Tom and Maggie and Reverend Pope, all of us are going to stand between you and that man. That's not a promise. That's what's happening.
Clara held Rosie up to her ear, listened. Then she looked back at Silas.
Rosie says facts are better than promises.
Rosie's the smartest person I know. Silas stood and looked at the four faces watching him. Hannah with her knife and her fury. Sam with his fists and his stutter. Clara with her doll and her terrible wisdom. And behind them, through the open door, Joe sitting beside Nettie's bed, his hand resting on his mother's knife. Ready. Here's what happens, Silas said. Hannah, ride to Tom's ranch. Tell him Crane's been here. Tell him we've got 24 hours. Sam, you ride to Maggie's store. Tell her the same. Ask her to get word to Reverend Pope.
I can't ride that well.
Buck knows the way. Just hold on and let him do the work.
What about me?
Clara asked. You've got the most important job. You stay with Nettie and Joe. Keep your sister warm. Keep her safe. Can you do that? Clara nodded, her face solemn.
Rosie and me are good at keeping people safe.
I know you are. Hannah and Sam left within the hour, riding in opposite directions. Silas stood at the cabin door and watched them go. 2 children on horseback, carrying messages that could mean the difference between freedom and chains. It felt wrong, sending them out alone. Everything about this felt wrong. Joe appeared beside him. You should have sent me. I need you here.
Why?
Because if something goes wrong before they get back, you're the best fighter in this cabin. Joe looked at him. Something shifted in the boy's face. Not pride exactly. Recognition. The acknowledgement that someone had seen what he was and valued it instead of fearing it.
My mother fought when she had to, Joe said. She didn't look for it, but she never ran from it.
Neither will we.
If Crane comes back with armed men, you and I can't hold this cabin, not with 2 children inside.
Then we don't hold the cabin. We move.
Where?
Silas had been thinking about this since Crane rode away. There's an old mining camp about 5 miles northeast. Abandoned 10 years ago. Stone walls, defensible position, only one way in.
You've been there?
Scouted it during the cavalry days. It's sound.
If we have to run, I can carry Nettie.
You're 9 years old.
I carried my mother's body 2 miles when she died. I can carry a 4-year-old.
The words hit Silas like a horse kick. He looked at Joe, at this boy who'd buried his mother with his own hands at 9 years old, who carried her knife and her wisdom and her grief every single day. And he understood something he should have understood sooner. Joe wasn't a child playing at being strong. He was a warrior who happened to be young. If it comes to that, Silas said, we go together. Nobody gets left behind. That's what my mother said when the soldiers came. Nobody gets left behind. Joe paused. She was the one left behind. I'm not your mother, and this isn't that. No, it isn't. Joe turned and went back inside without another word. The hours crawled. Silas checked his ammunition, cleaned his Colt, sharpened his knife. The things a man did when waiting was the only option, and action was the only cure for fear. Clara sat with Nettie, telling stories through Rosie's voice. Elaborate tales about a doll who lived in a magic cabin where nobody ever got cold or hungry or scared. Nettie listened. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed Clara's movements, and once, just once, the corner of her mouth twitched. Not a smile, the ghost of one. A memory of what smiling felt like before the world taught her that silence was safer. Rosie's building a castle, Clara told Nettie. It's got a big door that nobody bad can get through, and inside there's a fire that never goes out, and food that never runs out, and a pa who never leaves. Joe watched from his spot by the door. His knife was out. His eyes were hard. But when Clara said the word pa, something in his expression cracked. Just a splinter. Then he turned away and went back to watching the trail. Hannah returned first, riding hard, Tom's horse thundering behind her with the old man in the saddle. Tom dismounted carrying his rifle and a sack of ammunition. Crane's got friends in town, Tom said, catching his breath. 3 more men rode in this morning, hired guns, asking about McAllister's place. How many total? Crane plus 5, maybe 6. Armed and mean. Sheriff? Cross is staying out of it, officially, but he's not going to stop them either. Sam arrived 20 minutes later, buck-lathered and blowing. The boy slid off the horse and ran to Silas. Maggie's sending word to Pope. She said something else, too. Sam caught his breath. She said there's a man in town. Came in this morning on the stagecoach from Denver. Federal man. Wearing a star. Silas and Tom exchanged looks. Federal marshal? That's what Maggie said. She said Pope's talking to him right now. Did she say why he's here? She said Pope's letters finally reached somebody. Something that might have been hope opened in Silas's chest. He'd learned long ago not to trust hope. Hope was the first thing that died when the bullets started flying. But this was something. We can't count on that, Tom said. If this marshal's real, he might help. But if he's not, or if Stark got to him first, we're worse off than before. Agreed. We plan for the worst. They spent the afternoon preparing. Tom helped Silas move the most essential supplies to the old mining camp, making 3 trips with pack horses. Joe scouted the approach and identified 2 positions where a rifleman could cover the entrance. Hannah inventoried food and ammunition with the precision of a quartermaster. Sam asked Silas to teach him to shoot. You're 10. I know how old I am. Teach me to shoot. Silas looked at the boy, at those fierce eyes and those steady hands, and that jaw that locked down on fear and refused to let it out. You ever fired a gun? No. It's loud. It kicks. And it changes you. Once you pull a trigger, you can't unpull it. I know that. Do you? Because this isn't a game, Sam. If things go bad tomorrow, people could get hurt, could die. People have already died. My pa died. My mama died. I couldn't do anything about it because I was too small and too young and too damn useless. Sam's stutter vanished on the curse word, the emotion burning right through it. I'm not useless anymore. Teach me. Silas taught him. Not everything, just the basics. How to hold the rifle steady,
how to breathe, how to sight along the barrel and squeeze, not pull, the trigger. Sam listened to every word, absorbed every detail, and when he fired the first shot, the recoil knocked him back a step, but he didn't fall. He planted his feet, set his jaw, and raised the rifle again. Good? Good. Again. Sam fired 3 more times. Each shot was steadier than the last. The boy was a natural, his hands compensating for his mouth. Everything his stutter stole from his speech, his body returned in precision and control. "That's enough for today," Silas said. "One more." "That's enough." Sam lowered the rifle. His eyes were bright and his chin was up. Thank you." "Don't thank me. I just gave a 10-year-old a weapon. That's not something a man should feel good about." "It's something a father would do." Silas stopped. Sam stood there, the rifle in his hands, looking up at him with an expression that held no stutter, no hesitation, no fear. Just a boy looking at a man and seeing something he needed. "Yeah," Silas said quietly. "I suppose it is." Night fell. They gathered in the cabin for what might be the last peaceful evening they'd have. Tom cooked venison. Maggie arrived at dusk with more supplies and news. "Pope's with the federal man right now. Name's Marshal James Whitcomb. He's been investigating Stark for 6 months. The letters Pope sent finally reached the right desk." "Is he coming here?" "Pope says give him until morning. If Whitcomb is legitimate, he'll come with authority to stop Crane. If he's not, we'll know by sunrise." "That's a lot of ifs," Hannah said. "It's a lot of hope," Maggie corrected. "And sometimes hope is all you've got." "Hope didn't save my parents." "No, but it kept you alive long enough to find someone who would." Hannah looked at Maggie, at this woman who gave food to strangers and spoke hard truths with gentle hands. Then she looked at Tom, sharpening his knife by the fire, at Silas, loading his Colt, at Pope's guardianship papers pinned to the wall where everyone could see them. "Why are you all doing this?" Hannah asked. "You didn't know us a week ago. We're nobody. 5 kids from a dead wagon. Why do you care?" Maggie crouched down to Hannah's level. "Because I spent 30 years in this town watching good people do nothing while bad things happened. Because my husband died asking me to be braver than he was. And because when I look at you, I see the daughter I never had, and I'll be damned if I let anyone take her away." Hannah's wall didn't crack this time. It didn't need to. The wall was still there, still strong, still keeping her safe. But she opened a door in it, just wide enough for Maggie to step through. She leaned forward and pressed her face into Maggie's shoulder, just for a moment. Just long enough to remember what it felt like to be held by a woman who smelled like flour and soap and kindness. Then she pulled back, straightened her spine, and put her hand on her knife. "What time does Crane come?" "Dawn," Tom said. "Men like him always come at dawn. Makes them feel powerful." "Then we'll be ready at dawn." They settled in for the night. Tom took first watch. Silas took second. Joe insisted on third, and nobody argued because the boy had earned the right to stand guard alongside men. At midnight, Silas checked on each child. Sam slept with a rifle beside him, close enough to reach. Clara slept with Rosie, whispering in her sleep about castles with big doors. Joe sat against the wall, eyes open, knife across his knees, watching. Hannah lay beside Nettie, one arm draped over her sister, the other hand on her knife, even in sleep. And Nettie. Silas knelt beside the bed and looked at the smallest one. The child's eyes were open. She stared at him in the dark, those gray eyes that held silence like water held stone. Then she did something she hadn't done since that first night. She reached out and pressed her hand flat against his chest, over his heart. Silas pressed his hand over hers, held it there,
felt the small, warm weight of a child's palm against his heartbeat. "I've got you," he whispered. "All of you. And nobody's taking you anywhere." Nettie's hand dropped, her eyes closed, and she slept. Silas stood and walked to the window. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was clear, the stars hard and bright, the moon throwing silver across the white landscape. Somewhere out there, Crane was gathering his men. Stark was writing orders. The machinery of corrupt law was grinding into motion. And somewhere between here and Elk Creek, a federal marshal was making a decision that would determine whether 5 children lived as free people or disappeared into darkness. Morning would bring the answer. Morning would bring guns and badges and papers and men who believed that power meant owning other people's lives. But morning would also bring Silas McAllister and Tom Kincaid and Maggie Holloway and a one-armed reverend who'd lost his limb but not his fight, and 5 children who'd survived everything the world had thrown at them and were still standing. The fire burned low. Silas loaded his Colt one final time. 6 rounds in the cylinder, 20 in the box. And behind him, breathing in the dark, 5 reasons to make every single one of them count. Dawn came bloody. Red lights spilled across the snow like a warning, and Silas was already standing at the door with his Colt loaded and his jaw set when the first hoofbeats reached him. Tom heard them too. The old man rose from his chair, rifle in hand, and moved to the window. 6 riders, coming fast. Crane? Front and center, black coat. 2 men flanking him, 3 more behind. Tom squinted. And there's a wagon. Bringing a wagon means they plan to take the children today. Silas looked back into the cabin. Hannah was awake, knife in her belt, standing over Nettie's bed like a sentinel. Sam stood beside her, the rifle Silas had taught him to use, gripped in both hands. Joe was at the back window, his mother's knife drawn, his eyes scanning the tree line for anyone trying to circle behind them. Clara sat on the floor, with Nettie in her lap. Rosie pressed between them, whispering to her doll in a voice too quiet to hear. "Hannah," Silas said, "take the children to the back room. Bar the door." "No. This isn't a discussion." "You're right, it's not. I'm staying." "You're 12 years old. And I've buried both my parents and survived a blizzard and kept 4 people alive when the whole world tried to kill us. I'm staying." Silas didn't have time to argue. The riders were close now, close enough to hear Crane's voice calling out. "McAllister, your 24 hours are up. I've brought the sheriff, a deputy, and legal authority to remove those children. Open the door, or we'll open it for you." Silas stepped outside. Tom followed, rifle at his side. The cold hit them both, sharp and clean. The kind of cold that made everything feel more real, more final. Crane sat his horse at the front. Behind him, Sheriff Reuben Cross sat his own mount, looking like a man who wished he were anywhere else. The badge on his chest caught the red dawn light. 4 hired men flanked them, rifles out, faces blank. "Morning, Crane," Silas said. "Brought your whole circus, I see." "I brought the law, Mr. McAllister. Something you seem determined to ignore." Crane held up a paper. Court order signed by Judge Cornelius Stark. Custody of 5 minor children transferred to me, effective immediately. Sheriff Cross is here to enforce it. Silas looked at Cross. "You really going to do this, Sheriff? Take 5 children and hand them to a man who sells kids to mines?" Cross's jaw tightened. His eyes shifted, wouldn't meet Silas's. I'm enforcing a court order. That's my job. Your job is protecting people, including children. The law says those children belong with their legal guardian. That's Mr. Crane. The law is bought and paid for, and you know it. Cross's face reddened. His horse shifted under him, picking up on the tension. I don't want trouble, McAllister. Just hand them over and nobody gets hurt. Nobody's handing anybody over. Crane's patience cracked. Enough. Sheriff, execute the order. Cross dismounted slowly. His hand was on his gun, but he didn't draw. He walked toward the cabin like a man walking to his own hanging. Behind him, the hired men spread out, covering angles. Tom raised his rifle. That's close enough, Reuben. Cross stopped. Tom, don't do this. Don't make me. I've got a legal order. You've got a piece of paper signed by a crook. That ain't the same thing. In the eyes of the law, it is. Then the law needs glasses. The standoff stretched out. Silas counted heartbeats. 6 men with guns against 2. The math hadn't changed since yesterday. It was still bad. Then hoofbeats sounded from the south. Fast. Multiple horses. Everyone turned. 2 riders came up the trail at a gallop. The first was Reverend Elijah Pope, his one arm gripping the reins, his coat flying behind him. The second was a man Silas had never seen. Tall, lean, wearing a long gray coat and a silver star on his chest that was twice the size of Cross's badge. Federal Star. Pope pulled his horse up hard, spraying snow. Silas, don't shoot anybody yet. Wasn't planning on it. Yet. The federal man dismounted with the calm authority of someone who'd walked into worse situations and walked out again. He was 50, maybe older, with a face like chiseled granite and eyes that looked at Crane the way a hawk looks at a rabbit. Who the hell are you? Crane demanded. United States Marshal James Whitcomb. And you must be Victor Crane. Whitcomb pulled a document from his coat. I have a federal warrant for your arrest. Charges include child trafficking across territorial lines, conspiracy to commit forced labor, fraud, and corruption of territorial officials. The blood drained from Crane's face. That's absurd. I have legal papers. Your papers were issued by Judge Cornelius Stark, who was arrested in Casper 2 hours ago on 17 counts of corruption, bribery, and conspiracy. Whitcomb's voice carried across the clearing like a bell. Every order Stark signed in the last 3 years is under federal review. Every custody transfer, every guardianship, every piece of paper with his name on it is worthless. Cross took a step back. His face had gone gray. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about Stark. You didn't want to know, Sheriff. There's a difference. Whitcomb turned to him. You're not under arrest. Not yet. But you're relieved of duty pending investigation. Hand over your badge. Cross's hand shook as he unpinned the star from his chest. He held it out without a word. Whitcomb took it and put it in his pocket like it was nothing. Because to him, it was nothing. A badge meant nothing without the man behind it. Crane's hired men were already backing up. They hadn't signed on for a fight with a federal marshal. One by one, they lowered their rifles. Crane, Whitcomb said, you can come with me peacefully, or you can resist. I'd prefer peacefully, but I'll take either. Crane's hand moved toward his coat. Silas saw it, recognized the motion, and had his Colt drawn and aimed before anyone else reacted. Don't, Silas said. Crane's hand stopped. He looked at Silas, and for the first time the mask fell completely. No smile, no charm, no oil-smooth lies. Just a man who'd built his life on other people's suffering, and finally run out of road. Those children are worthless, Crane said. A stuttering boy? A mute? A half-breed? You're ruining your life for damaged goods. Silas walked forward, slow, steady, each step pressing boot prints into the snow. He stopped 2 feet from Crane's horse and looked up at the man. "Say that again." "They're damaged." Silas grabbed Crane's coat and hauled him out of the saddle. The man hit the snow hard, the air punching out of his lungs. Silas stood over him, Colt aimed at his chest. "Those children are worth more than every dollar you've ever counted. More than every name in your black book. More than your papers and your judges and your whole rotten empire." Silas's voice didn't shake. His hand didn't tremble. "They're mine. And if you ever come near them again, court order or not, badge or not, I will end you." That's not a threat. That's the only promise I've ever made that I'm looking forward to keeping. Whitcomb stepped forward. "That's enough, McAllister. I'll take it from here." Silas held Crane's eyes for one more breath. Then he holstered his Colt and stepped back. Whitcomb's men, 2 deputies who'd ridden in behind the marshal, pulled Crane to his feet and put him in irons. The hired guns surrendered without a fight. Cross stood to the side, badgeless, looking at the ground. "Marshal Whitcomb," Pope said, "there's a mining operation 20 miles east. Children being held in forced labor." "I know about it. I've got men riding there now. By noon, every child in that mine will be free." "How many?" Silas asked. "Our intelligence says between 15 and 20. Some as young as 6. Silas closed his eyes. 15 to 20 children in the dark, underground, working until they couldn't work anymore. And Crane had wanted to add 5 more. "The families?" Pope asked. "The ones who sold their children?" "We're tracking them down. Most were coerced or defrauded. They'll have the chance to reclaim their kids." Whitcomb looked at Silas. "Which brings us to your situation. 5 children, no biological connection. A guardianship document from a church that may or may not hold up in federal court." Silas's hand went to his coat, the papers against his chest. "Those children are staying with me." "That's not your decision alone. Federal law requires a formal custody hearing." "Then give me a hearing." "I intend to, but I need to know something first." Whitcomb stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Those kids, do they want to stay with you? Not because they're scared or because they don't have options. Because they choose to." "Ask them yourself." Whitcomb looked at the cabin. The door was open. Hannah stood in the frame. Behind her, 4 faces peered out. Whitcomb walked toward them, and Silas watched the man crouch down and speak to each child with a gentleness that didn't match his granite face. He spoke to Clara first. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Clara Mae Dawson, and this is Rosie." "Hello, Rosie." "Clara, do you know why I'm here?" "You're here to help." "That's right. Can you tell me, do you want to stay here with Mr. McAllister?" Clara looked at Whitcomb like the question was the strangest thing she'd ever heard. "He's not Mr. McAllister. He's Pa." Whitcomb's eyebrows rose. He turned to Sam. "And you?" Sam's jaw tightened. The stutter surged, but he fought through it. "Silas taught me to shoot, taught me to brush a horse, taught me that being scared doesn't mean being weak." He paused, drew a breath. "He's the first man who ever looked at me and didn't see something broken." "Do you want to stay?" "I want to stay." Whitcomb moved to Joe. The boy stood apart, as he always did, his knife on his belt, his posture straight. "Josiah Whitfield?" "Joe. Joe, you're not related to the Dawson children by blood." "No." "And you're not related to Mr. McAllister?" "No." "So why are you here?" Joe was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke with a clarity that cut through the cold air like his mother's knife through leather. Because my mother was Cheyenne, and the Cheyenne don't define family by blood. They define it by who stands beside you when the storm comes. Silas stood beside us, all of us. When he had every reason to ride past, he stopped. When he had every reason to give us up, he fought. My mother would say that makes him family. Joe touched the bone handle of his knife, and my mother was never wrong. Whitcomb stared at the boy. Then he nodded slowly and turned to the bed where Nettie lay. Hannah sat beside her sister, her hand on Nettie's shoulder. "This is Nettie," Hannah said. "She doesn't speak. Hasn't since our mother died." Whitcomb crouched beside the bed. "Hello, Nettie." Nettie looked at him, those gray eyes still and deep. She didn't move, didn't blink. The whole cabin held its breath. Then Nettie raised her hand. She pointed at Silas, standing in the doorway, and she pressed her palm flat against her chest, over her heart. Whitcomb looked at Silas. "What does that mean?" "It means, I love you," Hannah whispered. "It's what our mama taught her. It's the only way she talks." Whitcomb stood. He rubbed his face with both hands, and for a moment, the federal marshal looked like a man fighting to keep his composure. He cleared his throat. "And you, Miss Dawson?" "Hannah?" Hannah stood. She was taller than Whitcomb expected, or maybe she just carried herself tall. She looked at the marshal with eyes that had been old since Missouri, and were only now starting to remember what young felt like. "A week ago, I had a knife and 4 people to protect, and no one in the world I could trust. Now I've got a knife, 4 people to protect, and a man who took a bullet for me before I even asked him to." She stopped. Whitcomb walked back to Silas. He pulled a paper from his coat and a pen from his vest. "I'm going to recommend full legal custody to the federal court. My report will include statements from all 5 children, testimony from Reverend Pope, Margaret Holloway, and Thomas Kincaid, and evidence of Victor Crane's criminal operation. Given the circumstances, I expect the judge will approve within 30 days. 30 days? Paperwork takes time. But in the meantime, those children stay with you. Federal protective custody, with me as the authorizing officer." Whitcomb signed the paper and handed it to Silas. "Congratulations, Mr. McAllister. You're a father." Silas took the paper. His hand shook. He folded it carefully and placed it against his chest beside Pope's guardianship document. 2 pieces of paper. 2 promises written in ink instead of air. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, son, you've done it." "Haven't done anything yet. Still got a cabin that's too small, $4 that's already spent, and 5 kids who need more than I know how to give." "That's what neighbors are for," Tom grinned, and it took 10 years off his face. "Besides, I've been meaning to tell you. Mary Elizabeth, my late wife, she left a trust at the bank in Casper. Not much, but enough. She always said it was for children. Never had any of our own. I think she'd say these 5 qualify." "Tom, I can't take your money." "It's not my money. It's Mary's. And Mary's wish. You going to argue with a dead woman?" "Wouldn't dare." Maggie arrived an hour later with a wagon full of supplies. More food. Clothing in various sizes. Fabric for curtains and blankets. A rocking chair. "Every home needs a rocking chair," she said, "for reading stories." "Nobody reads stories around here," Silas said. "They do now." Maggie pulled out a stack of books from under the wagon seat. "Rebecca Thorne at the schoolhouse is starting the children's class next month. I've already enrolled all 5. "You enrolled my kids in school?" "Somebody had to." Maggie put her hands on her hips. "Silas McAllister, you are a good man and a brave man, but you cannot raise 5 children on venison and gunfighting lessons. They need books. They need arithmetic. They need to learn something besides how to survive. They need to learn how to live, Hannah said from the doorway, and she was smiling, small and cautious, and ready to disappear at the first sign of danger. But there, a real smile on a face that had forgotten how to make one. They spent the next weeks rebuilding. Tom and Silas added 2 rooms to the cabin. Sam hauled lumber and drove nails with hands that never shook, even when his voice did. Joe mapped the property lines and built a fence for the cattle, with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that land meant safety. Hannah organized everything, from meals to supplies to schedules, because 12 years of being a mother had given her skills that most adults didn't have. Clara decorated. She hung dried flowers in every window and put Rosie on a shelf where the doll could watch over the whole cabin. "Rosie's the guardian," Clara explained. "She watches when everyone else is sleeping." "What does Rosie see?" Silas asked. "She sees a family." And Nettie. Nettie healed slowly, the way deep wounds do. She didn't speak, but she communicated. She pressed her hand to her heart when Silas said goodnight. She pressed it to her heart when Hannah braided her hair. She pressed it to her heart when Sam made her laugh by crossing his eyes. And yes, she laughed. Silent laughter, her body shaking with it, her face transformed. Doc Harlan from Elk Creek came out and examined her. Physically, she's fine. Strong girl. The silence is grief. It'll break when she's ready. Could be months. Could be years. Don't push it. Silas didn't push it. He just made sure that every night, when he checked on each child, he stopped at Nettie's bed and pressed his hand to his own chest. And every night, she pressed hers back. Their conversation, wordless and complete. Spring came the way it always did in Wyoming, sudden and fierce. Snow melted, creeks swelled. The valley turned green so fast it hurt your eyes. Silas stood on the porch of his expanded cabin and watched his children, spread across the property like seeds taking root. Sam was in the corral, working with a new colt Tom had given him. The boy's stutter had eased, not gone, but quieter. He still fought for words sometimes, but he'd learned that his hands could say what his mouth couldn't, and the horses understood him perfectly. Joe was on the ridge above the cabin, sitting cross-legged in the grass, watching the valley the way his mother's people had watched this land for 1,000 years. He'd started teaching Clara some Cheyenne words, and Clara had started teaching Rosie, and now the doll was apparently bilingual. Hannah was inside, reading one of Maggie's books at the kitchen table. She still wore the knife, probably always would. But her shoulders were down, her jaw was unclenched, and yesterday Silas had heard her laughing at something Sam said, real laughter, unguarded and free, and the sound had nearly knocked him off his feet. Clara sat on the porch steps with Nettie, brushing the younger girl's hair while Rosie supervised from her lap. 100 strokes, Clara said. Mama always said 100 strokes makes it shine. Nettie sat still, letting herself be cared for. Her eyes were closed. Her face was peaceful. And then, so quietly that Silas almost missed it, she spoke. Mama. One word, just one, barely a whisper, but Clara heard it and froze. Hannah heard it through the open window and appeared at the door. Sam looked up from the corral. Joe stood on the ridge. Everyone stopped. Everything stopped. The whole world held still for a 4-year-old girl who'd been silent for months and had just remembered how to speak. Nettie? Clara's voice trembled. Did you just... Nettie opened her eyes. She looked at Clara, then at Hannah, then at Silas. Her hand came up and pressed flat against her chest. Then she pointed at all of them, every single one. A slow sweep of her small finger that took in the cabin, the porch, the corral, the ridge, the valley, everything. "Family," Nettie said. Hannah dropped to her knees and pulled her sister into her arms. And the sound she made wasn't crying and wasn't laughing, but something in between that held every broken piece of the last year and put them down, finally, gently, on the ground. Sam climbed over the corral fence and ran. Joe came down from the ridge at a speed that shouldn't have been possible. Clara wrapped herself around both sisters, Rosie squashed somewhere in the middle. Silas stood on the porch and watched his children hold each other. And something that had been broken inside him for 6 years, something he'd thought was dead and buried beside Catherine and Lily, something he'd given up on ever feeling again, rose up through his chest like water from a deep well and filled every empty space. He didn't join the embrace. Not yet. He just stood there and let it happen, let himself feel it. The full weight of love and grief and gratitude and terror and joy all mixed together into something that didn't have a name because no single word was big enough. Then Clara's voice came from the pile of children. "Pa, get down here." "I'm fine where I am." "Rosie says get down here." "Can't argue with Rosie." He knelt down and 10 arms pulled him in. Hannah's, Sam's, Clara's, Joe's, and Nettie's, small and sure, wrapping around his neck and holding on with the strength of a child who'd found her voice and wasn't going to let go of the people who'd helped her find it. "Family," Nettie said again, testing the word, tasting it, making sure it was real. "That's right," Silas said. "Family." That evening he walked to the 2 graves behind the cabin. The crosses were weathered, the wood soft. He hadn't been here in months, hadn't been able to. But tonight, with the sunset throwing gold across the mountains and the sound of his children's voices carrying from the cabin, he stood before Catherine and Lily and spoke. "I found them," he said. "Or they found me. I'm not sure which. 5 of them, all broken in different ways, all stronger than they know." He paused. "I was broken too. You knew that. You always knew that, Catherine. Even before you died, you knew I'd break." The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere in the cabin, Clara laughed, and Sam's voice followed. Steadier now, the stutter just a hiccup instead of a wall. "But I put myself back together. Not alone, never alone. They helped, all of them." Silas touched the cross with Catherine's name. "I'll never stop loving you, either of you. But I've got room now. Room I didn't know I had. Room for 5 more. His voice roughened. "I hope that's okay." The wind picked up. It felt, for just a moment, like a hand on his shoulder, light and warm and gone before he could be sure it was there. "Thank you," Silas whispered, "for teaching me how to love. I'm going to need it." He walked back to the cabin. The door was open, firelight spilling out into the evening. Inside, Tom was telling one of his buffalo hunting stories. Maggie was helping Hannah with dinner. Sam was showing Joe a card trick he'd learned from a book. Clara was brushing Rosie's hair and explaining to Nettie that the doll needed exactly 50 strokes, not 100, because doll hair was different from people hair. Nettie listened. And when Clara finished, Nettie pointed at the doll and said, quiet and clear, "Pretty." "She is pretty, isn't she?" Clara beamed. "Pretty," Nettie said again. And then, looking at Clara with those gray eyes that had been empty for so long and were now filling up with all the things silence had kept out, she added, "Sister." Clara burst into tears and hugged Nettie so hard, the doll fell on the floor. Sam picked it up and handed it back. Careful. Rosie's fragile. Rosie's tough," Clara said through her tears. "Rosie's the toughest one here. After Hannah." After Hannah. Silas sat down in the rocking chair Maggie had brought. His chair, in his cabin, with his children around him and his friends beside him, and the fire burning strong and the night coming down soft and cold and quiet outside. He'd started this winter with $12, 1 horse, and 2 graves. He'd gained 5 children, a community, a purpose, and something he'd thought was gone forever. Not happiness. That was too simple a word. What he'd gained was the understanding that broken things could be rebuilt, that empty spaces could be filled, that a man who'd lost everything could find everything again, not by looking for it, but by standing still when a horse refused to move on a snowy trail. 5 children, 3 girls and 2 boys. Each one carrying scars that would never fully heal. Each one braver than any soldier Silas had ever ridden with. Each one proof that family wasn't built from blood or law or paper, but from the simple, stubborn, terrifying decision to love someone and never stop. Clara looked up from the floor. "Pa? Yeah? Rosie wants to know something." "What does Rosie want to know?" "She wants to know if this is forever." Silas looked at Hannah, sharpening her knife by the fire, at Sam, practicing his card trick with hands that never trembled, at Joe, carving a piece of wood into a horse with his mother's blade, at Nettie, leaning against Clara, her lips moving silently around new words she was learning to say again, at Tom and Maggie, laughing about something in the kitchen, filling the cabin with the sound of people who chose to be here. "Tell Rosie it's forever." Clara smiled. "Rosie already knew. She just wanted to hear you say it." Outside, the last light faded from the mountains. Stars came out, cold and bright, the same stars that had watched over this valley for 10,000 years. The same stars that had watched a man find 5 children in a blizzard and make the only choice that mattered. The choice to stop. The choice to stay. The choice to build a family from nothing but courage and love and the unshakable belief that every child, no matter how broken, no matter how forgotten, no matter what the world has written beside their name, is worth fighting for. And in a cabin in the Wyoming mountains, a man who'd been dead for 6 years sat in a rocking chair, surrounded by the 5 people who'd brought him back to life. And he understood, finally and completely, that this was what he'd been surviving for. Not the grief, not the emptiness, not the long, dark years of waking up alone. This moment, these children, this family. This was always where the road was leading. He just had to stop long enough to find it.